Hello, everyone, and welcome back to House, the Shared Living podcast. This is the 10th episode in season 5. We're delighted to be back once more with some brand new content. I'm Dan Smith from Resi Consultancy and Vertiflow AI.
I'm Deenie Lee from the Property Marketing Strategists.
And I'm Sarah Canning from the Property Marketing Strategists.
And now a very quick word from our headline sponsor, My Student Halls.
Season 5 of Housed, sponsored by mystudenttools.com. List your properties commission-free and reach thousands of students searching for their university home.
Dan and the team from My Student Halls have been supporters of House since the beginning, so we're really grateful they're here once again as headline sponsors of Season 5. Anyone working in student accommodation is most likely aware of the importance of listing their properties with My Student Halls for those all-important leads as you get towards selling your rooms for the next season. So yes, please do reach out to Dan and the team at My Student Halls, get them into your budget for 26-27 leasing season. And also a huge thank you to Wash Station and Utopia for coming back and sponsoring Housed once again. More from them a little bit later. So, Sarah, the Movers and Shakers Breakfast. Now, I know you were invited by Tim and Nick from Amber. That's Amber, the energy guys, not Amber, the marketplace. But how was that? What was the outcome from it?
I've not been to a Movers and Shakers event before, and I was really grateful to be invited. It's a lovely setting in the Savoy for a breakfast, but the main event is the content, and we started with some data being shared from Marcus Dixon from JLL, fairly kind of negative about the kind of real estate sector. Headline stats such as build costs have risen 34% in the last 5 years, whilst house prices for sale have increased by 25% for a house, 12% for a flat, and regionally only 2% in London, and even Kensington is minus 12%. So that kind of painted the picture really as to, why build has really slowed down. The biggest shortfall in building is in London, the southeast and the southwest, as there's the lowest house price growth. And what I found really interesting, maybe because I used to work for a house developer at the beginning of my career, and we were, targeted to sell off plan, but now people are buying literally at completion stage. So developers aren't freeing up that cash flow basically to build the next development. They're having to wait literally for the development to be complete and people to buy at that stage before they can free up their cash and move on. So that's really kind of slowing down the momentum of house building. We then moved on to a panel discussion, kind of really focused around BTR really. We had Mike Williscroft from Bistory Group, Fiona Fletcher-Smith from L&Q, Alex Taylor from Telford Living, Michaela Hancock from Hilltop Property Partners, Joe Andrew from Enfield Council and London Councils, and it was chaired by Simon Scott from JLL. So it was really focused on affordability as well, as you can see by the panellists. One thing that really interested me that I wanted to talk to you guys about, and I didn't get the chance to ask the question on the day, but Michaela said that reducing amenities in build to rent will bring down the build cost and therefore the rent levels. Now, we get told time and time again in PBSA that there's no point reducing amenities. It doesn't reduce the build cost, and planners insist on amenity space. So, yeah, Dan, am I missing something, or why would those rules be different for BTR and PBSA?
So we'll let you all in on a little secret. We were just really having a debate off the record about that, and it's not as clear cut as I think we first thought. Normally we would just have that out in the open, but we don't want to be dismissive of anyone's comments or thoughts. We want to really make sure that we are taking those into consideration. Now, if you take out all the amenity space in BTR, you're left with an apartment complex with very little community. There's no space for the community there. And that, I think, is the real struggle. Yes, you can eke out more revenue, and therefore maybe overall the cost becomes slightly more affordable, or most likely that there are better returns therefore. But I think that amenity space is all important. Does it need to be that massive, full bottom floor? Maybe not. Maybe you do end up with some ground floor apartments or studios or whatever. But I still think there needs to be, in BTR, co-living especially, there needs to be some form of amenity space. So I don't think it's as simple as what Michelle has said with, reducing those amenities, bringing down the build cost, because I think obviously making on the underwrite, adding extra rooms in where there would be amenity space, I can understand that would generate more returns, of course, and every room needs to be considered. But I think that's where it starts to become just a simple apartment complex. And is that really what we need? Is that really what people need right now? Are they looking for community? Is that what they want? Is that what BTR actually is? Could it just be a segment of BTR that you don't have any amenities, it's on the affordable end, or it's just an apartment complex? Oh God, there's so much to run at with that. I'm really interested to see some more of the stats behind what people actually want in BTR. I'm actually off to the BTR conference at LD Events in a couple of weeks, so that'll be interesting. But yeah, Deenie, what are your thoughts? We've just talked around that for about 15 minutes ourselves, which has given me a nice little monologue. But what were your thoughts?
I guess the first thing I want to talk about is the difference between an apartment complex and built to rent. At a base level, is built to rent is exactly what it says in the tin. It's built for people to rent. If people can't afford to rent it, then you don't have places for people to rent, and therefore they don't live there. So if there comes a way to build it in a more cost-effective way that means people can rent there, then it becomes a product model that people can buy and need, and we know people need. And community comes in lots of different shapes and forms. It doesn't mean that you can't create community if you've got smaller social spaces or smaller spaces for people to congregate. And we've said time and time again that invariably these build-to-rent places are in city centres where there's a myriad of different places you can go and build a community and can congregate and get together and do things, as long as you've still got someone that's helping to do that. So I think it's again about product levels, isn't it? It's about not just having one type of product level that sits at a certain price point. It's about saying, yes, there's some build-to-rent properties that their brand is focused on community and their brand is focused on amazing social spaces and amenities, and they come at a higher cost. But that doesn't mean there isn't a place for a affordable build-to-rent place where people get the same security that you get in build-to-rent, that you know you're not going to be kicked out. You know someone's not going to come along and say, actually, I now need this place. You've got to go and find somewhere else. But you've already got a community because you have come from that city, you've lived in that city, you've got friends, you've got places where you can go and meet people. And you've also got a sense of actually Friday night is cinema night and a group of people from the complex are going to go down to the local cinema and we've got a special rate with the local cinema. So there's lots of different ways you can build a product. But the big thing for build to rent, which we don't talk about enough, is that it gives rental security.
I think it would also be remiss of us, with Utopia as the sponsors, not to talk about the additional cost of running massive amenity spaces. And I imagine, and anecdotally, we know that something like a co-working space within BTR is really well utilised during the day. But there are lots of other spaces within BTR that probably aren't utilised during the day. And they're being heated, air conditioned, lit, run the whole time. So I think there would be cost savings in those kind of spaces as well as the actual kind of non-revenue driving spaces. But Deenie, what you were just saying actually was discussed on the panel discussion at the Movers and Shakers breakfast, which was there still feels like there's this missing middle that's not being accounted for. And I think we see it a lot in PBSA as well, is you've kind of got the top level, high rent places. You've then got in kind of social housing, for rent, and they're eligible for people that are on lower incomes and on benefits. But you don't really have those spaces for people to live who are on lower incomes, but not eligible for benefits. And that's where I think this kind of lower amenitized build to rent space could really kind of come into its own, and otherwise we don't see a diversity in the product. And you end up with kind of people from very much the same background all living in the same place, and these kind of more city centre luxury spaces. And I think it'd be really, really damaging for BTR if it becomes a luxury product. It's a bit like a lot of later living, a lot of later living places are super fancy. So you've got the super fancy, luxurious, chandeliers and swimming pool kind of places. And then you've got the kind of council run care homes, and there's not really that kind of quality of later living in the middle. So I think it's right to call it out, the difference between affordable with a capital A and affordable with lowercase a.
It comes down to build costs, and what makes the numbers stack up for BTR, PBSA, co-living. The numbers stack up at the higher end of the market on paper, not necessarily from an occupancy standpoint once you've actually mobilized it, but it's really important that we have that cross section of from affordable right the way up to premium. But at the moment, primarily what I'm seeing across BTR, co-living, PBSA, we're filling the premium end of the funnel because, as I said, that makes the numbers stack up. Everyone then, obviously ends up on some kind of affordability sliding scale as the premium end fills, and then, realizes that actually their occupancy might not get to where they thought it would be, or they're pricing people out the market, and then they have to recalibrate, at which point the mid-range has to recalibrate, and then that pushes down into affordable, and then so on. I think if you're building from scratch, you could jettison all the amenity space you want and put in 12 studios instead of having a large social and study space. But at what point does that become a real issue for people wanting to live there? So, I think that we just need a multitude of options here for renters to choose from. And the affordable sector is not sexy. The premium end really is. But I can't see that filling the top of the premium funnel is going to bring about, obviously, more affordability in the short to medium term. Long term, yes, I would hope so. Keep, building, and the rents will hopefully start to drop, as we've seen in various places. But it just comes down to it's so difficult to build at the moment. I think that whole mantra of build, baby, build, which is championed by the housing minister at the moment. Who's building? Like, how can you build? And I think when it comes down to some of the more affordable options, yes, you can leave in BTR. You can leave like the Quintains, the Get Livings, the Grangers at the sort of mid to top range. But I'm not really seeing anyone pioneering that affordable, either from scratch or retrofitting or converting. And so, that normally happens by assets getting a bit older and a bit more tired, underwrites being recalibrated, rents being recalibrated, and like I said, everyone's sliding down that affordability scale. So to build from scratch, yes, strip out all the amenity spaces and put in studios. Yes, of course, that would make it cheaper. But what will that do for the long term of the sector, especially when BTR is still relatively fledgling? I don't know. And at what point do you talk about BTR as being amenitized or just a simple apartment complex with absolutely zero amenities or services, etc.? It's a very different ball game. Equally, it's all renting. So yes, build to rent. I do get that. But yeah, I think that's where the identity crisis might just creep in a little bit for BTR, I think.
Based on that, if we build for the high end, and that by default slips higher end properties that are built on a model for higher end returns are forced to then slip into a lower pricing bracket, that either makes them viable or non-viable. If they can still survive and make money, and then it's viable. And I guess what we're saying is actually the world's changed since we first designed the first BTR building and what we think and know and love about BTR, because it is really difficult to build. It is really costly to build, but we're still pricing that on what we've always known, as opposed to saying, well, actually, is there a different way to build this in the current pricing structures that we have?
I think with the longer term capital coming in, there's long-term capital in BTR, so they can kind of sit on some of these voids and some of these questions of how amenitized should we make this, and actually, do we need this? Do we need the cinema room or the smoothie bar or whatever it might be, or the yoga studio, or do we just make the rents cheaper for everyone by putting in another 5, 12, whatever studios or apartments? And that's, BTR is still a fledgling industry, and I think that's something that we'll need to work out with time. I don't think that filling the premium end is the only way for there to be an affordability slide. There must be some way of building more affordable, whether it's, methods of modern construction, modular, etc., or whatever else. I still don't think that we're eking out every last, marginal gain from construction right now, but I don't think anyone can be bothered, in part because it's so difficult and it seems like you're swimming against the tide. No one else is really doing it. So why wouldn't you just build premium and underwrite that? And, it depends on your covenants. All of this depends on your covenants. If you're building from scratch, you're making sure that you've got a good funder so that, if you don't quite hit your revenue or your occupancy targets, that, you're not going to breach your covenants at 80 or 90% occupancy. You need to be able to sit in and around the sort of 60, 70, at least for maybe the first year or so, and then go up and build up from there. And I think that's where, BTR still needs some work. I haven't seen many BTR properties really sort of fall over based on that, but I think in part that's because as and when there are occupancy challenges, they fill with students. And, that's not a secret anymore. And certainly something we'll be covering at Property Week on stage. But yeah, I think we've talked in circles there. It's a really interesting point from Michelle. And I do think there's something to be said for that affordable sector by getting rid of some of the amenity space, but equally what that does for the long-term health and sustainability of the sector, I don't know. Is that really going to move the needle that much on making a property affordable? Would it then sit in the mid to premium range rather than the premium range? I think that's the issue that you've got. So yeah, great. That sounds like a really good session. Look forward to my invite from Tim and Nick at some point. Now let's hear a quick word from our sponsor, Utopia.
This episode is brought to you by Utopia, the smart building platform that helps real estate owners protect the value of their assets.
From ESG compliance to energy efficiency and resident engagement, Utopia turns real-time data into action, making buildings better for people, planet and profit.
If you're in asset management or operations and care about performance, Utopia is your essential partner. Find out more at utopia.co.uk. That's utopi.co.uk.
So I was on stage with Utopia at the Class Foundation, and Chanel Turner-Ross did an incredible job on stage of getting everyone super excited for really the next iteration of what Utopia is. There's Utopia Lite now, which is effectively ESG data management and report production. Then you've got, of course, the hardware and the sensors that you would put into each room and give you full control over your data and energy management, the heating panels, the radiator valves. If you have any energy requirements and you want to understand how your buildings are running, how to make them run cheaper and more efficiently, then do reach out to the team at Utopia. And thanks very much for sponsoring this series. So we all know that universities are facing huge financial pressures at the moment. Those cuts are being felt right the way across the country. I've seen in recent days, pretty much every university is lining up redundancies in some way, shape or form, whether that be course cuts or any kind of operational cuts. And it's going to be really interesting going to the Cubo conference on Thursday, the Cubo Winter Conference in Birmingham, to see what the morale is like at universities. Some of them are doing brilliantly. They've got excellent teams, systems, and they're performing really well. But I'm not convinced that that's the same across the board. Now, one of the cuts that we've seen it was at the University of Leicester more recently, and within weeks of starting the academic year, some of these students were told that the entire modern languages department and film studies courses were under threat of closure. That's moved beyond that now into, yes, we are going to close them. Obviously, strike action began straight away. I know there is a formal consultation underway. It will last until February 2026. Now, University of Nottingham, they've also announced plans to close their modern languages department and 47 other courses. So, that's a very big part of the East Midlands that will probably lose access to modern foreign languages at university level. Now, the wider impact of this is, how can students plan for the future if they don't know if their course is going to survive? It's something we've talked about quite a lot on House already, but this is just being compounded by the recent announcements by University of Nottingham and Leicester. Are there going to be immediate cuts, with limited days on campus, or what does that look like? If the degree is honoured, are students going to lose the appetite for their course after so much uncertainty and certainty and leave anyway? Yeah, it's a really tricky one. Now, I've got a lot of thoughts on this because I think there's a lot that's down to AI in all of this. And, I think that there is so much volatility and decision paralysis with students not knowing what course to choose because they don't know if they're going to have a career at the end of it. I don't think it's as simple as don't choose to go and be a lawyer or don't choose modern languages. There's nuances for everything, but I think AI is one of the biggest disruptors here. But I've looked into it. Modern languages have been falling for quite some time. I think because of the direction of travel of AI and how simple translation has become. So I don't think it's purely AI driven. In spite of that, the CEO of Duolingo came out recently and said, actually, it's young people using our app more than anything else. And they want that sense of community. They want to go to a new place and build those friendships by being able to talk the language. But I can't help but thinking, and it was actually Ben Roberts at Utopia I was talking to this about, where he just got some new AirPods which have a translation function on them. So when someone's talking to you, it will translate exactly what they're saying. And I can't help but thinking, even though I am, speak a few languages and I am so I wouldn't say I'm a polyglot, but I've lived in France. I speak German, a bit of Spanish, Italian, and I think that would be incredibly sad if it did disappear, but I totally understand why that may be the case. I just think this is going to be endemic of what will happen across universities, because they'll all be looking at what's going to be the graduate outcome for this course. Are they going to get employed immediately? What's that salary going to be? What's that going to do for us? Translating does not pay particularly well. It will pay even less with AI coming about. And I think Leicester and Nottingham are thinking our graduate outcomes are going to look pretty bad if we're still just focusing on these modern languages. Let's focus on the courses where we are going to really show that we can produce the graduates of the right caliber who are earning the big salaries, etc., etc. And I think that is playing into a lot of these decisions. Sarah, what were your thoughts?
I think the main learning from it is that, if you are a PBSA operator or if you're a landlord, you're looking to invest, you've got to be super, super close to the universities in your city, because this has a massive, massive impact. I mean, Nottingham dropping 47 courses. Well, what does that look like in relation to student numbers? And okay, they might not drop them properly for another 3 years, but that's kind of the timing that people are looking regarding planning as well. So if you're looking to build in a particular university city, you've got to understand what their trajectory is, what they're planning to do. And, you've got to have those meetings before you put a spade in the ground. We hear a lot of the time that, a lot of developers don't. And it really annoys universities. But, that it's gone way beyond that now. It has to be part of your due diligence to work out what the trajectory of that particular university is. If they're going to continue to make redundancies, then something's got to give, and that's courses. So therefore, you're going to have less students. Therefore, do you need as much accommodation? And I think even like you just said, Dan, within that 3-year cycle, how disruptive is it of those students that have just started university that they've been told, we're going to kill your course, but we'll honour your degree. It'll probably be all right for the next 3 years. There's going to be disruption. You were just talking about strikes and, potentially lowering days on campus. So if that's happening, students can commute. I mean, we worked with a client in Leicester a few years ago, and there were students that were commuting from London to Leicester because it's a direct train, and actually they only had to be on campus 2 days a week. So you can't just look at the headline numbers. You've got to look at the future of the university, and you've got to understand the campus requirements. We're working with a university client at the moment that has made it policy that the students don't have to be on campus more than 2 or 3 days a week, and they're set days for the entire year, which enable students to work, which is, very I say the word woke. I don't think I've ever said the word woke, but it's quite woke of the university to understand that and to give the students the experience of being able to fit in work as well as learning. But there's also got to be a financial implication for that university that actually their lecturers are working less days per week. So it benefits both from a financial point of view and potentially benefits the students. So I just think, it's got to be collaborative. You've got to really, really understand your local market. You just can't build because, we've talked about the perception of numbers and data before. Those headline numbers hide a myriad of things.
I think the problem with languages is that languages are disappearing from schools anyway. My children will only have the option of learning French and that's it. And they don't have to, it's not mandatory. So actually, it's totally understandable that we've got to remove languages at the higher level because there's no funnel to lead them up. And I guess, yes, AI is part of that. The education system is part of that. But fundamentally, I think that we're moving to a world where less people go off to university. And that is something that, as you say, Sarah, operators, developers, and those working to house students need to understand and consider, because the landscape that we've known and supported and thought was the right landscape for the future generations is changing. I mean, total aside from real estate, but AI is having a massive impact. I still genuinely worry that we're going to lose the ability to think for ourselves and have critical thinking and know how to search for information. And that's something that we as a society, I guess, need to protect ourselves against, so that it's not just the machines doing the thinking, but is my personal opinion. I think I actually read a study recently on that is a real risk to society, that we're just going to forget how to think.
I completely agree with that, but I think that's a long-term problem. I don't think students will give a crap about what that might do for the long term. I think they will be focused on, what's my job going to be when I actually finish university? And it comes back to what I always say, and no, I'm not being disparaging towards them, but would I study a law degree right now, even if I thought I was, an amazing solicitor, lawyer in training? I wouldn't personally, because that industry is going to be completely upended. So is any kind of content creation. And I know that marketing is obviously very close to your hearts, but of course things like graphic design, all of these careers, and literally every career is going to be touched by AI in some way, shape or form. Some are going to be completely remodeled and transformed, and some are going to see less of an effect. There's all kinds of stats out there in terms of which jobs are going to be the most affected by AI. And it'll, I don't see AI really coming for everyone's jobs, and we're going to need some kind of national basic income to survive. I think that actually it's going to be about learning to work with AI, but students don't know what that looks like, because universities have been incredibly slow to showcase that, to say, right, if you're going to do a law degree, then you need to learn to use these tools, and this is how we're going to implement this within each module. And towards the end of it, yes, when you start to look at your career in your third year or whatever it might be, that's when you'll start to see that some of those entry level roles, they've either dried up or they've changed. And I think being able to adapt quickly is not the strong point of any university or any higher education sector, especially the UK. And I think that stood us in good stead in previous years. I do not think it does now. This is an absolutely pivotal moment, and I think the universities don't have the leadership. And this is, this is going to go out after the Cubo conference, because I'm sure I'd get some stick for it if I was there and people had listened to this. I just think that universities don't have the overall leadership from within the government or from within themselves to really showcase what that change is right now and should look like for the benefit of students and their graduate outcomes, but also for the benefit of the higher education sector. So yeah, this is going to have a big impact on universities. It is also by proxy going to have a big impact on PBSA. Deenie, as you said, with likely less students going to university, choosing that route, more apprenticeship degrees. I know you're a big advocate of that, and so am I from what I've seen so far. So I think we've got a lot to contend with. And then you
combine that with 2030 and the demographic dip starts again. There'll be less 18-year-olds going to uni. And I think that's something that is not really talked about enough. I am concerned for the sector beyond 2030 to a certain extent, but I think we'll just have to pivot. We'll have to recalibrate rents, and we'll have to think about what our demographic is, who's actually going to be living in these properties. So all PBSA need to be thinking about the next 10 years rather than just the next 1 to 2 years. And that's why thinking about having that long-term capital within the sector and really demanding more from your investors and the banks and the funders to say, look, we need to be in this for the long term. There's going to be some, challenges that are thrown up. There's some headwinds, of course, but, this is what we think will happen. This is how we want to withstand those shocks. And it's looking at, and Sarah, you mentioned about it, the fact that you can't just build it and they will come. You have to really focus on what's being studied at that university, etc., before you build. I don't think those conversations go on enough. I get asked to do them by investors and developers, but that's only focused on nominations agreements. Whenever a developer or investor comes to Resi Consultancy about that, it's typically to say, well, we need some kind of nominations agreement with the university. Can you help us out with that? Rather than, could you tell us what the most popular course is at that university? What's that going to look like in an era of AI and a focus on graduate outcomes? And where are the redundancies at the moment? What are they recruiting for? What are they really heavily advertising on those international portals? And, you look at Cambridge and Oxford, yes, of course, they're pretty much ranked top in terms of modern languages. Then you've got York, Bristol, Cardiff. If they start to jettison modern language courses, that's a significant number of students that won't be going to those universities. So certainly something to be focused on. We need to get granular on the data. And, for any clients that we've got, or if I was running an operator right now, I would be seriously looking at the courses that my students were studying and looking at how to future-proof that. Because if you're over-indexing on law, modern languages, graphic design, whatever else it might be, you do need to be a bit concerned about what that's going to look like in 2 to 3 years once this current cohort has gone through.
Just going to be really, really boring about that. And a lot of the problem is that a lot of operators don't have the data because the data that they're inputting isn't accurate enough. The PMS or booking systems don't have a course field, or it's not compulsory, etc., etc. We have to do a lot of audits, and a lot of the time we can't make head nor tail over that data. So they've got to get better at capturing their own data before they start looking, at external data as well. I know we've got to move on. I think what I would just say, and this is a conversation that we'll have to come back to, but you do have to really consider, bearing in mind everything we've talked about today, what the future of PBSA is. And actually, like we said before, is it that restrictive planning permission that is actually the challenge here? And if you just start building for people in a city, in a BTR co-living-esque way, actually, does that future-proof, your property? It's not a discussion for today. We've covered it before, and I know we'll cover it again, but it might be in some cities with some universities that actually it's not, viable to have buildings that are 100% for full-time university students.
And I think that's the point, is I think we genuinely need to look at the future and look at the makeup of how the future is going to be and how people are going to study, because they're not all going to be full-time students. They're going to be studying lots of different ways, picking up things they want to do. And I don't like to give Elon Musk any airtime, but I think he said this week that actually people will choose to work in the future and there won't be currency. Don't really understand what that means and how that comes about. But there is a changing world out there, and people will go to apprenticeships. And I think being practical with your hands is something you can protect against AI. And where those jobs are there, that's where people are going to go, because that feels like you're safeguarding your future there. So I think we need to stop looking back at the past and we need to look at the future and plan for that.
So some challenges there. There could be some major headwinds, but we just need to be mindful of the fact that we have to start thinking long term here. Now, a very quick word from Wash Station.
Wash Station proudly sponsor this episode of Housed. We provide best-in-class laundry solutions that complement your buildings. Wash Station. Smart, green, clean.
Thanks so much to the team at Wash Station for sponsoring this season of Housed. Really grateful to have you on board. Know you've done extremely well over the course of this year. I'm glad Housed has helped to play its part. But equally, I'm sure that it is more to do with the quality of service that you guys are offering any operators looking for laundry. So do get in touch with John and the team at Wash Station. Now, on to some positive news. We now know of operators who are trialling some innovative solutions with their void rooms, including turning larger studios into twin rooms. I've got direct experience of that, so that's going to be an interesting one. Advertising nightly rates for commuting students, and upgrading larger studios to proper dual occupancy studios. Now, that's great to hear. I'm wondering, is there anything else that we should be aware of? I mean, Deenie, Sarah, have you heard of examples of each of these? And do you think there's anything else out there that we could turn to?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this we're actually seeing with one of our clients at the moment. They've got void rooms and they've just decided to try some different things. And we're like, thank goodness. What an amazing way to use your void rooms. Why wouldn't you? You've literally got nothing to lose. You know, those rooms are not generating any income at all, and we're talking about really, really cost effective, like low cost innovations here. So nightly rates for commuting students. The only income that you need to put into that is some bedding and some towels, really. A student that's coming for 1 night or 2 nights isn't going to bring all of that, and kitchen packs. But if you're doing kind of summer lets or short-term stays, you'll have all of that stuff anyway, and the same, the conversion from, into twin rooms and dual occupancy. There's a little bit of, investment needed in additional furniture, but actually if it works, then that's just an investment, it's a CapEx investment effectively moving forward. So, really, really welcome. And yeah, keep telling us, listeners, what else you're doing, because when the going's good, you don't get a chance to try these things because you've got full occupancy. So then there's very little that you can do, because if you've got someone in room, you're not going to mess with that. So really, we know that anecdotally, most buildings have got 15 to 20% void rooms. Do something with them.
And I think this comes down to the conversation we were just having, is that this is about the future. And we've said for probably the last 3, 4, 5 years, we need more flexibility. We need more flexibility. If you've got void rooms, use them. There's a certain arrogance to just go, oh, well, things didn't quite work out this year because of X, so therefore we'll just carry on doing the same. There's the opportunity to be flexible, to be innovative, to try new things, as you say, Sarah, with very little risk. And I think there's enough data out there to show that actually there probably is a market for this kind of flexibility. There is a market for different models. There is a market for these kinds of changes. And now's the time to try it and test it so that we can see what is going to work in the future and learn those lessons now.
On that topic, Sarah, Deenie, you've just launched your cost of living youth forum insight. So what can you share about that?
It was a piece of research that we've come back to. So we have done it in the past. I think it's always good to kind of test where things are and where they've changed. The kind of headline data from this research is that 48% of students say they are struggling financially. Although interestingly, that percentage is reduced compared to when we did it in 2023. 39% have a part-time job, less than in 2024 and 2023 when we last asked. What we don't know is if its side hustles are included or what is considered to be a part-time job. 48% exceeded their accommodation budget, mainly because they didn't want to compromise on location. And 76% feel that inclusive bills will help keep costs down. And laundry and travel costs are surprising additional costs not usually considered. So I think that it's a really interesting data set. I think there's more to it than just people are not really struggling financially anymore. I think there's probably a part of normalization. I think there's probably more students that aren't accessing university that would have done before because financially they can't. So I think there's a lot open to discussion there. And again, it's great to have this data and to see how those trends are changing over time.
Yeah, you can download the report and watch the sound bites from our focus groups by going to the propertymarketingstrategist.co.uk insights. And by the time we launch this podcast, we will have also hosted our Youth Forum Cost of Living launch webinar as well, which will be available to rewatch on our YouTube channel.
Amazing. Thanks for that. Do go and check out that link. Now, the last episode of this series in a few weeks is going to be a special Q&A episode, as we've done at the end of every season. So if you've got a question you'd like me, Deenie or Sarah to answer, or if you want us to get an expert to answer it, or you've got an idea of a topic for us to discuss, please do email hello@housedpodcast.com. Or send any of us a WhatsApp, a voice note, or an email. We want to cover all of those different asset classes within shared living. So we want your questions about co-living, BTR, PBSA, university accommodation, HMOs, and rented later living. The juicier and more controversial, the better. Thanks as ever to My Student Halls for being our headline sponsor, and to Utopia and Wash Station as well. We'll see you again next week.